Did you know that high blood pressure is the #1 risk factor for death globally? Heart disease remains the #1 killer of men and women worldwide. And today we will take a deeper dive into what blood pressure really is, how to properly check it, the warning signs of heart attack and stroke, and how to prevent them. And we'll also discuss why mouthwash is not your friend. But first, let me tell you that as an adult and geriatric physical therapist, blood pressure is super important, and it's something that I check on all of my patients prior to treatment. If it's too high or too low, I may need to adjust the treatment plan. And in a few rare instances, send the patient to the ER, because hypertension can be a matter of life or death, or of lifelong impacts due to heart attack or stroke. And with permission from my husband and his sister, I'd like to tell you the story of my father-in-law, whom we'll call George. 3 months after our wedding, my husband and I received the shocking phone call that George had had a massive stroke and he was fighting for his life in the ICU. He lived alone and had laid on the floor for 36 hours before being found. Not exactly how we envisioned our honeymoon phase, but life can certainly throw us curveballs at any time. George was only 60 when this happened. We knew he had high blood pressure, he was not an exerciser, and he had some other issues. But 60 is young, sounding younger all the time. And the doctors gave him 2 weeks to live. We placed him on hospice care and began planning his funeral. 2 weeks later, he began to rally. Small improvements were being made, and they transferred him to a long-term acute care hospital where he was taken off of hospice. Soon, they were ready to discharge him, which was a relief in so many ways. But my husband and sister-in-law were now faced with more difficult decisions. They obtained legal guardianship and began making decisions about finances, assisted living, eye surgery, medical equipment, and so much more. We were very grateful that George was going to make it, but he was gonna need 24/7 assistance, and the path ahead seemed like climbing Mount Everest. You will hear more about George in future episodes, but the take-home message here is to know your blood pressure and keep it in optimal range, whether that's naturally or managing it with medication if prescribed by your physician. So we hear about blood pressure all the time, and we know it's important, but let's zoom in to better understand what it's really all about. We have a finite amount of blood circulating in this closed system, about 5 to 6 liters, depending on your size. And we have 60,000 miles of arteries that deliver this nutrient-rich blood throughout the body. And at the center of it all is a fist-sized pump, your heart. Your heart is controlling so many functions all at once. It's shuttling, returning blood into the lungs to be oxygenated before it's later pumped out to the entire body by the left ventricle. And as you imagine all these highways of vessels carrying blood in all directions, it makes sense that we want them to be dilated or expansive in order to allow blood flow and efficiency. If the vessel lining becomes stiff or hardened or narrowed, problems will eventually emerge. Think about a garden hose. If it gets kinked or occluded, or if a residue builds up on the inner lining, what happens? The pressure has to increase in order for the water to flow. So the same thing happens in our vessels. This is why monitoring your blood pressure is essential for detecting potential problems and being able to intervene sooner rather than later. Now, I'm an Oklahoma girl living in Texas, and we tend to make a habit of saying, "Bless your heart," in response to virtually anything, from a burnt pie, flat tire, a death in the family, or even a fresh new pimple on your pretty little face. We even tend to hold our hand over our heart when we say, "Bless Sally's heart. She really tried to pull that dinner together, but honestly, it was a flop." Do you ever notice how often the word heart is used with reverence? We say things like, "Honey, no matter what you do, put your whole heart into it. Or, I left a piece of my heart in Tulsa. You get the idea. All of these phrases demonstrate the magnitude of how we perceive the heart. All right, so back to the good stuff. Get this. In 1974, only 54 million Americans had high blood pressure. And today, it's 100 million and rising. And alarmingly, 1 in 7 kids has high blood pressure. We must change this trajectory. And we know that insulin resistance is most likely the cause of primary hypertension. We can link our episode on inflammation and insulin resistance if you want to learn more about that. The reason for this is because the vessels stay constricted if the endothelial cells are insulin resistant. It also impairs the kidney's ability to excrete excess salt. And sugar directly increases blood pressure by increasing uric acid, which inhibits nitric oxide. Nitric oxide, not to be confused with nitrous oxide, which is the laughing gas you might get at the dentist, enters the conversation because it's a critical player in vasodilation, or the opening of the arteries. Because at the end of the day, this is a matter of blood flow. 90% of hypertension is due to nitric oxide inhibition. And guess what one surprising villain in this process is? Mouthwash. That's right. Your alcohol-based mouthwash is killing key bacteria that produce nitric oxide, and this is a mostly unknown contributing factor to high blood pressure. And if you'd like to take a really deep dive, a very scientific dive into nitric oxide, I would highly recommend looking into the work of Dr. Nathan Bryan. He's on many podcasts, and we will link his book, The Secret of Nitric Oxide, Bringing the Science to Life. We'll link that in our show notes. So come with me, and we're gonna learn how to properly check our blood pressure and understand what the numbers mean. And stay tuned, because we're going to outline the warning signs of heart attack and stroke, and we'll discuss some practical preventative measures. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the wrist cuffs because they're a little bit finicky, but if that's what you have, that is certainly better than not checking your blood pressure at all. There are many great upper arm cuffs out there. This one that I have happens to be the Omron Bronze, and I like it because it has an app associated with it where it'll just compile all your data. You can check it anytime, and you can even show it to your physician or provider the next time you go. This one also has the IntelliSense on it, which detects if you have atrial fibrillation or AFib. Many of the devices won't pick that up, so I do like that this particular device has that, and we're going to link this in our show notes as well in case you'd like to look into that. We always want to make sure when you check blood pressure that you're as relaxed as possible, which is sometimes hard, especially if you're in the doctor's office and you have white coat syndrome, but try to be as relaxed as possible. You want your legs uncrossed, okay? And then the cuff is going to go on your upper arm. You want this line going in line with your brachial artery that runs right this way. And it's going to be kind of snug. It's going to fit kind of snugly. And then the very difficult part of this for me is no talking. So you want to sit still, no talking, and ideally rest your arm, close to heart level if you can. All right, so we have our top number, which is the systolic, and the bottom number, which is the diastolic pressure. That systolic pressure is actually the amount of pressure being exerted on your arterial walls when the heart is beating. And then your diastolic number is the amount of pressure being exerted against your artery walls between the beats. So that is sometimes a little bit interesting for people to know. Ideally, we want our blood pressure to be 120/80 milligrams of mercury or less. For each 5-point rise in blood pressure, it increases your risk of death by 10%. I must include that we can certainly have blood pressure that's too low. And maybe someday I'll share my hypotensive experiences with you. But generally, we are seeing a population with far too high of blood pressure. So let's go through the warning signs of heart attack and stroke that you should not ignore in yourself or a loved one, and seek medical attention immediately. We're starting with the warning signs of heart attack. Chest pain, jaw pain, left arm pain, pain between your shoulder blades, lightheadedness, shortness of breath, fatigue, and even nausea and vomiting. Women in particular often overlook or dismiss many of these more atypical symptoms, like the nausea, the neck pain, etc. Now, our warning signs of stroke: headache, lightheadedness, vision changes, speech changes, diminished or loss of function or sensation, specifically maybe on one side of the body, an uneven smile, and balance problems or drifting to one side. Y'all, so much of this is in our control to keep our blood pressure in range. So let's discuss 5 ways we can largely reduce the risk of heart attack and stroke. Number 1, do not smoke. Number 2, ditch the alcohol-based mouthwash that we just discussed earlier. Number 3, aerobic exercise. I'm talking about taxing your cardiovascular system. Get your heart rate up. You should be breathy. You should be only able to answer questions in short words or phrases. This may mean a brisk walk, walking uphill, running, biking, swimming. I even still see people rollerblading from time to time. We need to be striving for 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise per week, and ideally working up to 300 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise per week. And certainly, you're going to want to build up to the 150 if you're a beginner, and certainly seek clearance from your physician or provider first. Number 4, nutrition. We are inundated with ultra-processed food and liquid sugar here in the United States. If we just could cut out a chunk of these things while also cooking more at home, it would make a huge difference. And I'm speaking to myself here too. And lastly, number 5, stress management. We all have stress. I mean, I don't know anyone who's exempt from this. And stress can increase blood pressure. Recently, I discovered a significant uptick in the blood pressure of one of my patients who usually has good blood pressure. I probed her a little to see, if anything had changed, and she revealed that she had fallen for a scam. And it was a situation where they obtained her banking information. She was so upset and stressed, as you can imagine, over this, that it was beginning to reveal itself in her health, in her blood pressure. She finally got it all resolved, but this is a very tangible example of how stress can affect our health. Finding healthy ways to manage stress is super important. And one of those ways may be the exercise we just talked about. It may also be breathing techniques, spending time with friends or loved ones, or anything that just brings you peace and uplift. I'd love for you to share your healthy stress management tools in the comments. Thank you for joining me. And if you found healthful connections here, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend or loved one.